The bad is very loud. The bad has a talent for making an entrance. It does not knock. It does not clear its throat. It arrives fully dressed, dragging a chair across the floor, and sits right in the middle of your attention. Sometimes before you are even properly awake. You can be having an ordinary morning. Nothing remarkable. The kettle boils. The light through the window looks fine. Then one small thought slips in. A memory. An unfinished task. Something someone said 3 years ago that was slightly off. And suddenly the room feels different. Heavier. As if the air itself has decided to participate. That is how the bad works. It does not need permission. It assumes access. What is strange is how normal this feels. We rarely question why the unpleasant thought gets the microphone first. We tend to treat it like an emergency broadcast. Important, urgent, demanding immediate emotional response, even when it has no real instructions attached. The bad is loud, but it is not necessarily useful. It has volume, not wisdom. If you listen closely, you might notice something else. The bad often repeats itself. Same worries, same regrets, same imagined futures with slightly different costumes. It is not creative. It is persistent. It wins by endurance, not by originality. Good things, on the other hand, behave very differently. They are polite to a fault. They wait in the corner. They do not interrupt. They assume you are busy. Sometimes they leave quietly when they are ignored, without making a scene. A decent conversation you had yesterday. A problem that did not happen. A body that carried you through the day without complaint. These things do not announce themselves. They do not demand review. They just are. This imbalance creates a strange illusion. Because the bad is louder, it feels larger. Because it takes up more mental space, it feels more important. Over time, volume gets mistaken for truth. You might notice this most clearly when things are actually fine. Those are the moments when the mind seems to panic slightly. It starts searching, scanning, digging through old files. Surely something must be wrong. Surely we are missing something. Calm cannot be trusted. Silence must mean danger. So the bad steps in to help, loudly. It is not doing this to be cruel. The mind is very old equipment. It was built for survival, not contentment. It is excellent at spotting threats. It is less interested in noting that nothing is currently attacking you. From that perspective, the bad is just doing its job, a little too enthusiastically. The trouble begins when we treat every alarm as accurate, when we assume that loudness equals priority, when we give the bad our full attention simply because it refuses to lower its voice. There is a subtle shift that happens when you start to notice this pattern. Not fix it, just notice it. You begin to see how often the bad shows up uninvited, how it speaks in absolutes, how it rarely offers solutions, only commentary, how it sounds very confident for something that mostly talks about things that have not happened yet. You may also notice how physical it can feel. A tight chest, a heavy stomach, a clenched jaw. The bad likes to bring props. Good things, again, are much quieter. They do not create physical drama. They do not tense muscles. They often feel like nothing at all. And because they feel like nothing, they are easy to dismiss. Nothing happened today. That sentence sounds neutral, but it is actually full of good news. No accidents, no disasters, no sudden phone calls that change everything. An entire day passed without demanding heroics. That counts. The bad does not like this way of counting. It prefers highlights. It prefers contrast. It prefers stories with sharp edges. It also prefers attention. There is a strange relationship between attention and amplification. What you listen to gets louder. What you replay gains detail. What you resist often returns with better arguments. The bad understands this instinctively. It knows that if it can keep talking, it can keep growing. This is why trying to silence it rarely works. Silence feels like a challenge. The bad takes it personally. What seems to help more is recognizing the noise for what it is. Volume, not authority. Urgency, not accuracy. This recognition is quiet, almost boring, which is fitting. You are not arguing with the bad. You are not correcting it. You are simply noticing that it has arrived as it always does, unannounced and confident. There is something oddly comforting in realizing how predictable it is. Once you see the pattern, the surprise fades. The bad loses one of its strongest tools, which is the ability to convince you that this time is different. This time it really matters. This time you must drop everything and listen. Sometimes it does matter. Of course it does. Life includes real problems, real loss, real pain. This is not about pretending otherwise. It is about noticing how often the alarm rings when there is no fire. The good does not compete in this way. It does not shout to be heard. It does not dramatize itself. It does not demand that you feel grateful or inspired or transformed. It is content to exist quietly in the background. A chair that supports your weight, a familiar street, a moment where your phone does not ring. These are not exciting. They are stable. And stability, while deeply valuable, does not trend well in the mind. So the bad gets the stage. Focusing on the good, at least at the beginning, is less about choosing positivity and more about adjusting your hearing. About realizing that the loudest voice in the room is not always the most relevant. It is about letting the good exist without forcing it to perform. This can feel underwhelming at first, almost disappointing. You may expect some noticeable emotional shift, a sense of relief, a warm glow. Often, nothing happens. And that might be the point. The good does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives like a steady floor under your feet. It does not announce itself because it does not need to. It assumes you will notice eventually. The bad assumes the opposite. As you move through your day, the bad will continue to show up. It will comment on your decisions. It will remind you of your limitations. It will speak with certainty about futures it cannot possibly see. You do not need to chase it away. You can let it talk. But you do not have to give it the microphone every time it clears its throat. Sometimes, simply recognizing that the bad is being loud is enough to make space for something else. Not happiness, not optimism, just room. Room for the quieter things that were already there. Waiting patiently, not offended by being ignored, ready when you are, but not in a hurry. The bad will always be loud. The good will always be quiet. Learning the difference is less dramatic than it sounds and far more useful. Good things are bad at marketing. Good things do not know how to promote themselves. They have no slogans, no catchy hooks, no urgency. They do not pop up with notifications or insist you act now before they disappear forever. They assume, somewhat optimistically, that you will notice them on your own. This may be their biggest flaw. A good morning does not announce itself as such. It just passes quietly, leaving behind a few ordinary moments that seem too small to mention. A warm cup of tea, a stretch that feels fine, a thought that does not spiral. Nothing here demands applause. If this were a product, it would fail immediately. We are trained in subtle ways to respond to noise. Bright colors, strong claims, emotional extremes. The bad understands this perfectly. It frames itself as urgent, critical, and essential for your survival. It sells fear with impressive confidence. The good does none of this. It does not exaggerate. It does not dramatize. It does not even promise improvement. It simply offers presence. Presence is not exciting. Consider how rarely you think about things that are working. Your lungs, the ground, gravity behaving itself. These systems perform flawlessly in the background, day after day, without demanding review. When they do their job well, you forget they exist. The bad takes advantage of this gap. It steps forward and fills the silence with commentary. It points out everything that could go wrong, everything that might be missing, everything that does not quite measure up. And because it is talking, it feels important. Good things, meanwhile, are waiting in the corner, holding a modest brochure that no one picks up. There is a quiet arrogance to the good. It assumes it does not need to sell itself. It assumes its value is obvious. This is rarely true in a world trained to equate intensity with meaning. A stable relationship does not feel dramatic. A consistent routine does not feel impressive. Emotional steadiness does not generate stories worth repeating. There is nothing to warn others about, nothing to confess, nothing to overcome, so it gets overlooked. You might notice this when you try to recall good moments from the day. The mind hesitates. It searches for highlights, big events, clear wins. If nothing stands out, it concludes that nothing good happened. This is a marketing problem, not a reality problem. The good often looks like absence, absence of conflict, absence of crisis, absence of disruption. And absence is hard to celebrate when you are used to reacting rather than noticing. We rarely say, "Today was good because nothing demanded too much of me." It sounds lazy, unambitious, unremarkable. But there is a quiet richness in days like that. The bad, on the other hand, is excellent at storytelling. It knows how to frame itself as a turning point, a warning sign, a critical insight. It makes itself feel necessary, even when it is just repeating old material. It also knows how to personalize. It uses your name, your history, your insecurities. It feels tailored, even when it follows the same script every time. Good things do not personalize. They do not say this is specially for you. They just happen to be there. A body that heals, a mind that learns, a world that continues, imperfect but functional. None of this comes with branding. This creates a strange imbalance in how we assess our lives. We count problems carefully. We catalog disappointments. We track mistakes with impressive precision. Meanwhile, the good is left uncounted, unrecorded, assumed. Over time, this can make a life feel emptier than it is. Not because it lacks good moments, but because those moments were never framed as noteworthy. They were not marked. They were not remembered. Imagine if good things advertised themselves the way bad ones do. If your coffee screamed for attention, if a peaceful evening sent push notifications, if a sense of okayness demanded acknowledgement, it would be unbearable. So instead, the good stays quiet. It trusts you to notice. And when you do not, it does not complain. There is something almost generous about that. The problem is not that the good is too small, it is that it refuses to exaggerate. When you start to focus on the good, you are not suddenly surrounded by better circumstances. You are surrounded by the same ones, just seen without the usual filters. The dramatic lens comes off. The volume drops. This can feel anticlimactic. You might expect focusing on the good to feel uplifting, energizing, inspiring. Often it feels neutral, calm, slightly underwhelming. Again, a marketing failure. The good does not aim to impress. It aims to sustain. There is a difference. A life sustained does not look impressive from the outside. It looks repetitive, predictable, ordinary, and yet it holds together. It continues. It allows room for rest. The bad cannot do this. It can only interrupt. Once you notice how poor the good is at self-promotion, you may feel a small responsibility shift. Not a duty, not an obligation, just an awareness that if you do not notice the good, it will not insist. It will simply pass. This does not mean forcing gratitude. It does not mean listing blessings or reframing every difficulty. That would be another kind of noise. It means allowing yourself to register what did not go wrong, what did not escalate, what quietly supported you without comment, a chair that did not collapse, a conversation that ended normally, a task that took exactly as long as expected. These are not exciting. They are reliable, and reliability is deeply underrated. The bad is allergic to reliability. It cannot feed on it. It cannot build narratives from it. So it looks elsewhere. Good things do not mind being boring. They do not mind being taken for granted. They continue anyway. That is their strength, even if it is not flashy. Focusing on the good, then, is not about chasing joy. It is about correcting a visibility problem, about noticing what has been there all along, patiently waiting without raising its voice. You are not discovering something new. You are noticing something familiar that never introduced itself properly. And perhaps that is fine. Perhaps the good does not need better marketing. Perhaps it just needs a quieter listener, someone willing to notice what does not shout, what does not interrupt, what does not demand attention, but supports everything else quietly every single day. That kind of noticing does not change your life overnight. It simply makes it feel more accurately sized. Your brain's favorite hobby, complaining. The brain enjoys complaining. This is not a metaphor or a personality flaw. It is a pastime, a reliable, low-effort activity that requires no special equipment and very little planning. You can do it while brushing your teeth, while waiting in line, while nothing in particular is happening, especially when nothing is happening. Complaining gives the brain something to do, a sense of motion, a problem to turn over and inspect from multiple angles. Without it, there is a noticeable gap, silence. And the brain does not trust silence, so it fills the space. It starts small, a minor irritation, a delay, a tone of voice that could have meant something else. These are perfect entry points, harmless enough to seem reasonable, familiar enough to feel justified. Soon the commentary expands. Why is this always like this? Why does this happen to me? Why can't things just work? None of these questions are designed to be answered. They exist to keep the mind occupied, like tapping your foot, like doodling in the margins. A habit, not a strategy. What makes complaining particularly effective is that it feels productive. It sounds like analysis. It borrows the language of problem solving. It creates the illusion that something useful is happening. Often, nothing is. The brain is not actually trying to fix the issue, it is narrating it, repeating it, refining the tone, adding details. Complaining is not about resolution, it is about engagement. This is why you can complain about the same thing for years without getting bored. The brain enjoys familiarity. Complaints are predictable. They follow known paths. They allow the mind to revisit old material without risk. You already know how the story ends. This is comforting in a strange way. Silence, on the other hand, offers no script, no familiar loop, no clear role to play. The brain has to sit with itself without commentary, and this feels suspicious. So it complains. There is also a social element to this hobby. Complaining bonds. It signals belonging. Shared dissatisfaction creates quick connections. You do not need much in common to agree that something is annoying. This reinforces the habit. You complain. Someone agrees. The brain receives a small reward. Validation, recognition, proof that the complaint was worth voicing. Over time, the brain learns that complaining is useful. It gets attention. It gets agreement. It fills time. Why would it stop? The trouble is not that complaining exists. It has its place. Real problems deserve acknowledgement. Injustice deserves voice. Discomfort deserves respect. The trouble is frequency. When complaining becomes the default setting, it shapes perception. The brain starts scanning for material, looking for flaws, noticing inconveniences that would otherwise pass unnoticed. It becomes very good at this. Soon, the mind feels busy even in peaceful moments. There is always something to comment on, always something slightly wrong, always a tone to critique, or a situation to improve. This creates the illusion that life is heavier than it is. Complaining also has a curious effect on time. It stretches it. A 5-minute delay becomes an event. A small discomfort becomes a chapter. The mind slows everything down to examine the irritation properly. Meanwhile, good moments pass quickly, unremarked, undocumented. The brain is too busy complaining to notice them. This is not malicious, it is efficient. Complaining requires less energy than curiosity, less vulnerability than acceptance, less uncertainty than quiet. It is a safe activity. You might notice how automatic it is. The complaint often forms before you realize it. By the time you are aware, the sentence is already halfway constructed. It feels like thinking, but it is more like reflex. The brain reaches for familiar patterns, and complaining is one of the most accessible. It requires no creativity, no risk, just repetition. There is also a subtle sense of identity tied to it. Complaints can become part of how you understand yourself. The one who notices problems, the one who sees through nonsense, the one who is not fooled. Letting go of constant complaining can feel like giving up that role. If you stop complaining, who are you then? Just someone experiencing things without commentary. That feels oddly exposed. So the brain continues. It is worth noticing that complaining rarely leads to action. It leads to more complaining. The loop feeds itself. Each repetition strengthens the habit, making the next complaint easier to access. This does not mean you need to silence it. The brain does not respond well to being told to stop. It interprets that as another problem to complain about. Instead, noticing the habit can be enough. Noticing how quickly the complaint appears, how familiar it feels, how it repeats itself almost word for word, how it offers no new information. This noticing is not critical. It is curious, almost amused. There goes the brain again. Same topic, same tone, same conclusion. When you notice this, something subtle happens. The complaint loses a bit of its authority. It becomes background noise rather than instruction. The brain may continue. Yep, it usually does. But you are no longer fully enrolled. This creates space. In that space, something else can appear. Not necessarily positivity, often just neutrality. A moment where nothing is being evaluated, nothing is being judged. For a brain used to constant activity, this can feel strange, even uncomfortable, but it is also restful. Complaining keeps the mind busy, but it does not let it rest. It is mental pacing, movement without progress. Once you see this, you might start to smile at it. Not in mockery, in recognition. Of course the brain complains. It has always done this. It learned it early. It refined the skill over years of practice. It would be unreasonable to expect it to stop now. So it continues its hobby. You do not have to take it away. You can simply stop treating it like a full-time job. Let the brain complain if it wants. Let it run its familiar loops. But you do not need to follow every sentence to the end. You do not need to respond to every irritation as if it were urgent. Sometimes you can just notice the activity and let it pass. The brain will likely find this confusing at first. It is used to your participation, used to being taken seriously. It may complain about that too. That is fine. Over time, you may notice that the volume drops slightly. Not because the brain has changed, but because it is no longer performing for a captive audience. Complaining loses some of its appeal when it is not being rewarded with attention. The brain may then look for other hobbies, some quieter, some less exhausting, or it may just sit there for a moment, unsure what to do. That moment, awkward as it may feel, is not a problem. It is simply the sound of nothing needing commentary. And for a brain accustomed to constant complaints, that can feel surprisingly spacious. Nothing is wrong, and that feels suspicious. There are moments when everything seems fine, and instead of enjoying that, the mind grows uneasy. The day is ordinary. The body is functioning. No messages demand urgent replies. Nothing is actively falling apart. And yet, something feels off. Not because anything is wrong, but because nothing is. This is a strange kind of discomfort. It does not come with a clear cause. There is no problem to solve, no story to follow. Just a quiet sense that you should be doing something, thinking something, preparing for something. The mind does not trust calm. When life slows down, the brain often assumes it has missed a detail. It starts scanning for threats, reviewing recent conversations, replaying small interactions to see if anything was misunderstood. Silence becomes suspicious. It feels like waiting for a noise that never comes. This reaction makes sense if you consider how accustomed the mind is to activity. Problems give shape to time. They create urgency. They justify mental effort. Without them, the brain feels underemployed. So it invents work. Nothing is wrong, but perhaps something could be wrong. Nothing has happened, but something might happen. The present moment feels incomplete without a concern attached to it. This habit is deeply ingrained. Many people only feel fully engaged with life when they are managing something, fixing, anticipating, preventing. Calm feels like an interruption rather than a state to inhabit. There is also a subtle fear beneath this reaction. If things are calm now, will that make the next disruption worse? If you relax, will you be caught off guard? Staying tense can feel like preparedness. The mind equates vigilance with responsibility. So when nothing is wrong, vigilance looks for a job. It might find one in the future, a vague anxiety about what lies ahead, a reminder that this peace is temporary, that something will eventually demand attention. Or it might look backward, revisiting old regrets, re-examining past choices, searching for unresolved threads. Anything to avoid sitting with the uncomfortable truth that right now things are simply okay. Okay is not dramatic. It does not create stories worth retelling. It does not confirm your identity as someone who struggles, overcomes, survives. It is just okay. This can feel like standing in an empty room. No furniture, no distractions, just space. Some people feel restless in such rooms. They want to fill them, decorate them, add noise. Silence feels exposed. The mind reacts similarly to moments of calm. It wants to furnish them with worries. It feels safer when there is something to lean against, even if that something is unpleasant. There is also a cultural layer to this. Many environments reward busyness. Struggle is often mistaken for importance. If you are not stressed, are you trying hard enough? If you are not overwhelmed, are you fully engaged? Calm can feel like laziness in disguise. So when nothing is wrong, there is a subtle pressure to justify that state, to explain it, to anticipate its end. You might notice yourself checking things that do not need checking, refreshing inboxes, reviewing lists, creating small tasks to fill the gap. These actions are not about productivity. They are about comfort. They give the mind something to do, so it does not have to sit with the unfamiliar feeling of ease. The mind has learned to measure safety through activity, through alertness, through constant monitoring. Letting go of that feels risky, and yet nothing is actually happening. This is where suspicion arises. The mind cannot accept calm at face value. It wants evidence, proof, assurance. It may even generate physical sensations to support its unease. A tightness, a restlessness, a sense of unease with no clear source. The body joins the conversation. This can be confusing. You feel anxious, but you cannot explain why. You search for a reason. The mind offers suggestions. Maybe you forgot something. Maybe something is about to go wrong. These suggestions are not based on evidence. They are based on habit. The habit of equating calm with danger. Over time, this creates a pattern where peace becomes uncomfortable. You relax for a moment, then immediately brace yourself. You enjoy a good day, then wait for the balance to shift. As if life operates on some unspoken rule that good moments must be paid for. This belief is rarely questioned. It feels intuitive. It feels cautious. It feels wise. But it also keeps you from fully inhabiting the moments when nothing is wrong. Those moments pass quickly anyway. Adding suspicion only shortens them further. It is worth noticing how the mind reacts when things are fine. Not to correct it, just to observe. You might catch the impulse to create a problem, to revisit an old one, to imagine a future issue, to fill the quiet with noise. Seeing this pattern can be unsettling at first. It reveals how unfamiliar ease has become. You may realize that calm feels like a foreign language. You recognize it, but you are not fluent. This is not a failure. It is a consequence of long practice in vigilance. The mind has spent years being rewarded for spotting issues. It has not had much opportunity to practice resting without justification. So when it encounters a moment where nothing is wrong, it hesitates. It does not know what to do with itself. That hesitation is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is different. Different does not mean dangerous. The challenge is not to force yourself to relax. That only adds another task, another demand. The challenge is to allow the discomfort of calm to exist without immediately fixing it, to sit in a moment where nothing needs attention and let that be enough. This can feel awkward, even boring. The mind may protest. It may insist that you are wasting time, that you should be doing something more useful. But usefulness is not always measured in activity. Sometimes, the most useful thing is allowing the nervous system to experience a moment without threat. Nothing is wrong. That sentence can feel strange on the tongue. It does not come with instructions. It does not point to a next step. It just describes the present moment. Learning to accept that description without suspicion takes time. It requires unlearning the habit of constant readiness. You may never fully trust calm. That is fine. The mind is cautious by design. But you can learn to recognize when its suspicion is based on habit rather than reality. And in those moments, you can choose not to escalate the quiet into a crisis. You can let nothing be wrong, even if it feels a little strange. Small wins wear disguises. Small wins rarely look like victories. They do not arrive with clear signals or satisfying conclusions. They slip in quietly, dressed as ordinary moments, and leave before anyone thinks to applaud. If you are waiting for progress to feel impressive, you may miss it entirely. A task that took less energy than usual, a reaction that did not escalate, a decision made without overthinking. These are wins, but they do not announce themselves as such. They look like nothing happened, and that is exactly why they are overlooked. The mind is trained to recognize change through contrast. Big before and after moments, clear turning points, sharp differences. Small wins do not offer this. They operate within the existing structure of your life. They adjust something by a few degrees and move on. From the outside, everything looks the same. This makes them easy to dismiss. You tell yourself it was luck or timing, or that it does not really count. You move on waiting for something more obvious. Meanwhile, the quiet accumulation continues. Small wins often feel unsatisfying because they do not resolve a story. They do not provide closure. They just make the next moment slightly easier. The mind prefers endings. It likes completion. A problem solved, a chapter closed. Small wins do not close chapters. They shorten sentences. This makes them hard to track. You might notice this in how you evaluate your days. You remember what went wrong easily, the awkward conversation, the delay, the moment you wish you had handled differently. These stand out because they disrupted something. But what about the moments that did not disrupt anything? The urge to react that passed, the habit you did not fall into, the unnecessary worry you did not entertain. These moments leave no trace. They do not create memories because nothing dramatic occurred. Yet these are often the moments where real change happens. Small wins also lack ceremony. There is no natural pause to acknowledge them, no social signal to mark them as important. You do not tell people about the time you stayed calm in traffic. You do not celebrate the day you stopped yourself from sending a message you would later regret. There is nothing to post, so the mind assumes these moments are insignificant. This assumption shapes how you see yourself. You believe you are not making progress because nothing feels different. You conclude that you are stuck, even as small adjustments quietly reshape your experience. Change does not always announce itself as change. Often, it feels like repetition with slightly less resistance. Small wins also challenge the mind's preference for effort. We are taught to associate improvement with struggle, with visible exertion. If something feels easier, we assume it must not matter. But ease can be a sign of integration. When a skill becomes natural, it stops feeling like work. When a habit settles in, it no longer requires motivation. When a boundary holds, it does so without drama. These are wins that look like normal life. The trouble is that normal life does not register as progress. It feels static, unremarkable. So the mind looks elsewhere. It looks for bigger goals, more visible achievements, something that will finally feel like proof. In doing so, it overlooks the evidence already present. Small wins also tend to hide inside restraint, things you did not do, reactions you did not have, paths you did not take. It is hard to celebrate an absence. Not lashing out, not overcommitting, not chasing a familiar distraction. These are all small wins, but they leave no physical marker. They cannot be pointed to. You only know they happened because something feels slightly lighter afterward. Even that feeling may pass quickly. This creates a strange paradox. The more progress you make internally, the less visible it becomes. The outer story quiets down. There is less drama to report, fewer highs and lows. From a certain angle, it can look like stagnation. But what is actually happening is stabilization. Stability does not feel like movement. It feels like ground, and ground is only noticed when it is missing. Small wins are also cumulative in ways that are hard to perceive. One calm response does not change much. 10 calm responses start to shift patterns. 100 quietly reshape how you experience situations. But because no single moment stands out, the change feels invisible. This can be discouraging if you expect transformation to feel dramatic. The mind wants milestones. It wants to check boxes. It wants confirmation that its efforts are paying off. Small wins do not offer this easily. They require trust. Trust that subtle shifts matter. Trust that consistency is doing something, even when you cannot see it clearly. This trust is uncomfortable. It asks you to move forward without applause, to continue without clear validation, to accept that progress might feel boring. The mind resists this. It prefers excitement, even if that excitement comes from struggle. There is also a timing issue. Small wins often reveal their value later. In hindsight, you realize you handled something differently than you would have before. You notice a situation that would once have drained you now passes with less impact. These realizations arrive quietly, often long after the win itself occurred. By then, the moment has passed, so the win remains unclaimed. This pattern can make you underestimate yourself. You believe you are not improving because you are not counting the right things. You are measuring progress by noise instead of stability, by visible change instead of reduced friction. Small wins reduce friction. They make life feel slightly less effortful, slightly more navigable, slightly less reactive. These shifts are easy to miss because they do not draw attention to themselves. They simply make the path smoother. You may notice that certain things no longer bother you as much, but you do not mark that as progress. You assume it is coincidence or maturity or just a good day. But these are the signs. Small wins also challenge the story of sudden breakthroughs. The idea that change happens all at once, that one insight or decision will transform everything. Real change is quieter. It is incremental. It happens while you are busy living. It does not wait for permission to begin. Recognizing small wins does not mean celebrating every minor thing. It does not mean forcing positivity or turning life into a scoreboard. It simply means allowing these moments to count. allowing them to exist without dismissal. You do not need to feel proud. You do not need to feel accomplished. You can just notice that something went a little better than it used to. That noticing is enough. Over time, this changes how you relate to progress. You stop waiting for proof. You stop needing visible confirmation. You trust the process because you can feel its effects, even if they are subtle. Life does not suddenly become easier. It becomes steadier. And steadiness, while not exciting, is deeply supportive. Small wins may never stop wearing disguises. They may always look like ordinary moments, like nothing special. But if you learn to recognize them, you start to see how much of your life is quietly working in your favor. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to matter. The mood that arrives for no reason. Sometimes a mood appears without an explanation, no clear trigger, no event to point to. You wake up and something feels off, or surprisingly light, or vaguely unsettled. The day has not started yet, but the tone is already set. The mind immediately goes looking for a reason. This search feels automatic, necessary. Surely moods do not just arrive. Surely there must be a cause, something you forgot, something you sensed but did not consciously register. The mind begins its investigation. It reviews yesterday. It scans the calendar. It checks the body. Did you sleep enough? Did you eat something strange? Did you miss a message? Did something subtle go wrong? Often, nothing turns up. This does not stop the search. The mind is uncomfortable with unexplained states. It prefers stories, explanations. A clear chain of cause and effect. When a mood arrives without credentials, the mind treats it like a suspicious package. It must be opened, inspected, interpreted. But moods do not always come with reasons. Sometimes they are the result of small internal shifts, chemistry, hormones, weather, accumulated fatigue, or nothing identifiable at all. They arrive quietly and sit down. This can be unsettling, especially if the mood is unpleasant. A heaviness, an irritability, a vague sadness with no clear object. The mind does not like this kind of ambiguity. It wants to attach the feeling to something concrete, so it invents one. If the mood is low, the mind finds flaws. It points out disappointments. It replays old mistakes. It searches for evidence that justifies the feeling. This makes the mood feel more legitimate. If the mood is good, the process is similar, but quieter. The mind still looks for reasons, but it is less urgent. A good mood without explanation feels like a gift. A bad one feels like a problem. Both are treated as puzzles to solve. The trouble is that this constant interpretation can amplify the mood. What started as a mild internal shift becomes a full narrative. The mind adds meaning, consequences, predictions. The mood grows heavier or brighter depending on the story attached to it. This is how a simple feeling turns into a day-long experience. There is also a subtle judgment involved. You feel something, and then you judge yourself for feeling it. You ask whether it is appropriate, whether it makes sense, whether you should feel differently. This adds another layer. Instead of just having a mood, you now have an opinion about the mood. This opinion is rarely kind. If the mood is low, you worry about what it says about you, your life, your progress. You wonder if something is wrong, if you are regressing, if this feeling means more than it actually does. If the mood is good, you may feel suspicious. You wait for it to disappear. You brace yourself. You wonder how long it will last. In both cases, the present moment is overshadowed by analysis. The mood itself becomes secondary. The story around it takes center stage. This habit of interpretation is deeply ingrained. We are taught to make sense of our inner states, to understand them, to trace them back to their source. This can be useful at times. Patterns matter. Awareness matters. But not every mood is a message. Some are just weather. They pass through, they change the light for a while, then they move on. The problem arises when you treat every mood like a signal flare, when you assume it requires action, when you believe you must respond immediately. This keeps you busy, but not necessarily grounded. The mood that arrives for no reason is often the most honest. It is unfiltered by story, unattached to circumstance. It simply reflects the current internal state. Trying to explain it can distort it. You may notice that moods often shift on their own if left alone. The heaviness lifts, the lightness fades, without intervention, without understanding. This can feel unsatisfying to the mind. It wants credit. It wants to believe that change happened because of something it did. But often change happens because time passed. This challenges the idea that you must manage every internal experience, that you are responsible for regulating every feeling, that nothing should be allowed to exist without supervision. This is exhausting. Allowing a mood to exist without explanation can feel like neglect, like giving up control, like being careless with your emotional state. But there is another way to see it. You are allowing the system to do what it does naturally. Not every internal shift requires engagement. Some require space. The mood that arrives for no reason does not need to be fixed. It does not need to be justified. It does not need to be understood immediately. It can simply be there. This is difficult because it goes against habit. The mind wants to act, to interpret, to intervene. Sitting with a feeling without labeling it can feel like standing still in a moving crowd. Everything in you wants to step aside, to do something. But if you stay, you may notice something interesting. The mood begins to change shape. Without a story feeding it, it loses intensity. It becomes less specific, more diffuse. It stops demanding attention. This does not mean it disappears instantly. It means it stops growing. You may also notice that some moods arrive precisely because there is space, because nothing else is happening. They surface when the noise drops. This does not make them dangerous. It makes them possible. The mind often interprets this timing incorrectly. It assumes the mood caused the quiet, rather than being revealed by it. So when things slow down, the mind braces itself. It expects discomfort, and when a mood appears, it feels confirmed. See, something is wrong, but nothing may be wrong at all. It may simply be that you finally noticed what was already there. This perspective changes how you relate to your inner life. You stop treating it like a machine that must run smoothly at all times. You stop expecting constant emotional coherence. You allow variability. Some days feel heavy. Some days feel light. Some days feel neutral. These shifts do not always correspond to external events. They are part of being human. Trying to control them completely creates more tension than relief. The mood that arrives for no reason is an invitation to loosen the grip on explanation, to practice tolerating ambiguity, to trust that not everything needs a narrative. This does not mean ignoring your feelings. It means not overinterpreting them. You can acknowledge a mood without asking it to justify itself. You can notice it without building a day around it. This takes practice. The mind will continue to search for reasons. It will continue to offer stories. You do not have to follow them. You can let the mood sit quietly in the background while you go about your day. It does not need to be resolved before you move on. Often, by the time you remember to check, it has already changed. And if it has not, that is fine too. Not every mood is a problem. Not every feeling is a signal. Some are just passing states, moving through a system that is far more complex than any single explanation. Learning to live with that complexity without constant interpretation creates a subtle kind of ease, not because the moods stop coming, but because they stop being interrogated. They arrive. They stay for a while, and eventually they leave, often without ever telling you why. Other people's chaos is not a group project. It is surprisingly easy to feel responsible for other people's chaos. Someone is stressed, upset, overwhelmed, or confused, and before you know it, your own body reacts as if the problem has been assigned to you personally. Your chest tightens, your mind starts working, you begin drafting solutions that were never requested. This happens quietly, almost politely. You may not even notice the moment when someone else's emotional weather becomes your internal climate. It feels natural, automatic, like empathy doing its job a little too thoroughly. But not everything you feel needs your involvement. Other people's chaos often arrives without warning. A complaint, a story, a sudden emotional download delivered mid-conversation. There is urgency in the tone, even if the situation itself is not urgent. The energy pulls you in. Before you know it, you are participating. You ask questions. You nod. You offer reassurance. You start replaying the situation in your head later, refining advice you never gave, solving problems that are not yours to solve. This can feel generous, supportive, like being a good person. It can also be exhausting. There is a difference between caring and carrying, between listening and absorbing, between being present and becoming responsible. That line is thin and easy to cross. Many people learn early that being useful means being involved, that love is demonstrated through problem solving, that attention is shown by engagement. So when someone brings chaos, you lean in, you help organize it. The trouble is that chaos rarely wants to be organized. It wants expression, validation, witness, not solutions, not management. When you step in too quickly, you take on weight that was never meant to be shared. Other people's chaos is often unresolved for reasons beyond your control. It may involve patterns that predate you, choices you did not influence, situations you cannot change. No amount of mental effort on your part will resolve it. Yet the mind keeps trying. It treats the chaos like a puzzle. If you can just understand it better, analyze it more thoroughly, you might reduce the discomfort, yours or theirs. This rarely works. Instead, the chaos multiplies. It now exists in two places. There is also a subtle sense of importance tied to this habit. Being needed feels good. Being the one who listens, who helps, who stabilizes others can become part of your identity. Letting go of that role can feel uncomfortable, almost selfish. If you do not engage, who will you be then? Just someone observing. That can feel like distance, or indifference, or abandonment. But observation is not neglect. You can acknowledge someone's experience without adopting it. You can listen without internalizing. You can care without merging. This is not always easy, especially when emotions are intense. Strong feelings are contagious. They invite participation. They ask for reinforcement. The body responds before the mind catches up. You might notice how quickly your posture changes, how your breathing adjusts, how your thoughts accelerate. You are no longer just listening. You are involved. This involvement often continues long after the interaction ends. You replay conversations. You anticipate future ones. You worry about outcomes you cannot influence. The chaos lingers. Over time, this can create a constant background noise, a sense that you are always carrying something, even when nothing is happening directly. It can be hard to tell where your concerns end and someone else's begin. This blending is often praised. Sensitivity, compassion, emotional intelligence. These are valued traits, but without boundaries, they become liabilities. You are not meant to be a holding space for every emotional discharge you encounter. You are not a processing unit for other people's unresolved feelings. You can be present without being porous. This distinction is subtle. It is not about shutting down. It is about staying grounded. When someone shares chaos, you can notice the urge to fix, to explain, to soothe, to take responsibility. That urge is familiar. It feels helpful. You do not have to act on it. Sometimes the most supportive response is simply staying where you are, listening without internal movement, not rearranging yourself to accommodate the storm. This feels strange at first, passive, insufficient, but it often creates more space than intervention. Other people's chaos tends to organize itself when it is allowed to exist without interference. When it is heard but not carried, when it is acknowledged but not absorbed. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop confusing empathy with obligation. You are allowed to remain steady while someone else is unsettled. This steadiness can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to matching emotional intensity. You may worry that you appear cold, or detached, or unhelpful. But steadiness is not absence, it is presence without entanglement. You might notice that when you stop taking on other people's chaos, you have more energy, more clarity, more internal quiet. This can feel unfamiliar. You may even feel guilty. Why do I feel lighter when someone else is struggling? This guilt is learned. It comes from the belief that shared suffering is a requirement for connection. It is not. You can support without suffering alongside. There is also a practical reason to step back. When you are emotionally entangled, your perspective narrows. You lose objectivity. You react rather than respond. By staying grounded, you are actually more capable of offering meaningful presence. Not advice, not solutions, just stability. Other people's chaos does not improve when it spreads. It improves when it is contained. Contained does not mean suppressed. It means held in the appropriate place. That place is not always you. You may notice resistance to this idea, a fear of being seen as uncaring, a fear of disappointing others, a fear of losing connection. These fears are understandable. They are based on past experiences where withdrawal meant abandonment. But boundaries are not abandonment. They are clarification. Clarification of where you end and someone else begins. Clarification of what is yours to carry and what is not. This clarity allows relationships to breathe. It prevents resentment. It prevents burnout. It also creates honesty. You are no longer performing emotional labor out of habit. You are choosing when and how to engage. This choice is quiet. It does not need to be announced. It is internal. You notice the chaos. You acknowledge it, and you remain where you are. This may feel like doing nothing, but doing nothing is not the same as disengaging. It is staying present without adding yourself to the problem. Over time, this practice changes how you experience interactions. You stop leaving conversations feeling drained. You stop carrying unfinished emotional threads into your private time. You begin to trust that other people are capable of handling their own experiences, even when those experiences are messy. This trust is respectful. It honors their autonomy, their resilience, their process, and it honors yours. Other people's chaos will continue to appear. That is part of being around humans. It is unpredictable. It is expressive. It is often loud. You do not need to match its volume. You can let it pass through the room without letting it move into your body. This does not make you distant. It makes you available in a different way. Available without being consumed. And that is a quieter, more sustainable kind of care. Good enough is actually very good. The phrase good enough rarely sounds flattering. It carries a tone of compromise, a hint of settling, as if something better was possible but quietly abandoned. We use it with a shrug, not with pride. And yet, good enough does most of the work in the world. Good enough meals keep people fed. Good enough sleep gets the body through the day. Good enough decisions move life forward without unnecessary delay. Entire systems run on things that are sufficient, not perfect. Perfection, meanwhile, mostly stays theoretical. The mind has a complicated relationship with good enough. It understands the concept intellectually, but resists it emotionally. Good enough feels like a threat to standards, a slippery slope. If you accept this, what will you accept next? So the mind pushes for more, better, cleaner, complete. This pursuit sounds noble. It is often framed as ambition, care, quality. But there is a point where refinement turns into hesitation. You may notice how often tasks stall, not because they are difficult, but because they are nearly done. The last 10% stretches on. Details multiply. The finish line moves. This is not about excellence. It is about discomfort. Stopping at good enough requires tolerance. Tolerance for imperfection, for ambiguity, for the idea that something can be finished without being flawless. The mind finds this unsettling. Good enough also lacks drama. There is no grand reveal, no moment of triumph, just a quiet sense that this will do. In a culture that celebrates extremes, this feels underwhelming. We are taught to admire the exceptional, the breakthrough, the optimized, the version that stands out. Good enough blends in. It does not seek attention. This makes it easy to overlook its value. Most of life happens in the realm of good enough. Relationships thrive on consistency, not perfection. Work progresses through steady output, not constant brilliance. Health is maintained through regular habits, not heroic efforts. The extraordinary moments exist, but they are supported by a foundation of adequacy. Without good enough, nothing moves. There is also a psychological comfort in aiming for perfect. It provides cover. If you never finish, you never have to face evaluation. If it is not ready, it cannot be judged. Good enough removes that protection. It says, this is what I have. This is where I am. This is sufficient. That level of exposure can feel risky, so the mind invents reasons to delay, to refine, to reconsider. It frames this as responsibility, but often it is avoidance. Good enough also challenges identity. If you see yourself as someone who cares deeply, who strives, who does things properly, accepting good enough can feel like a betrayal of self. Who am I if I do not push further? The answer is usually simpler than expected. You are someone who finishes. Finishing is underrated. Finished things exist in the world. They can be used, experienced, improved later. Unfinished things remain ideas. They consume mental space without providing value. Good enough allows things to exist. It also allows you to rest. Perfection has no resting point. There is always another improvement to consider, another angle to optimize, another flaw to address. Good enough has a clear boundary. This is acceptable. This can stop now. That boundary is relieving. It frees up attention, energy, time. It creates room for other things to matter. There is a fear that accepting good enough will lead to mediocrity, that standards will slip, that effort will decline. In practice, the opposite often happens. When you release the pressure of perfection, you engage more consistently. You start more easily, you finish more often. The overall quality improves because the work actually gets done. Good enough creates momentum. It also allows for learning. You see how something functions in reality, not just in your head. You receive feedback, you adjust. Perfection postpones this interaction indefinitely. Good enough is not careless, it is intentional. It recognizes diminishing returns. It understands that beyond a certain point, additional effort yields minimal improvement. This awareness is a skill. It requires discernment. Knowing when something has reached its functional purpose. Knowing when further refinement is about anxiety rather than value. This discernment develops with practice. You may notice resistance when you try to stop at good enough, a nagging sense that you should do more, that you are cutting corners, that you will regret this later. Sometimes you might, but often you will not. Often you will realize that no one noticed the difference, or that the difference did not matter, or that the extra effort would have gone unseen. This realization can be unsettling. It challenges the belief that worth is tied to excess. Good enough invites a different metric: function, sufficiency, fit for purpose. These are quieter measures, less emotional, more practical. They do not boost the ego, but they support the system. There is also kindness in good enough, toward yourself, toward others. It acknowledges limits, time limits, energy limits, attention limits. Ignoring limits in pursuit of perfection is often praised. But limits exist whether you acknowledge them or not. Working with them is not weakness. It is realism. Good enough also creates space for enjoyment. When you are not constantly evaluating and improving, you can experience what you have created. You can use it, share it, live with it. Perfection keeps you at a distance, always tweaking, never inhabiting. There is a difference between caring and over-controlling. Good enough sits on the caring side. It says, I have given this what it needs. It does not say, this is the best I will ever do. It says, this is appropriate for now. That now matters. Life moves in phases. What is good enough today may not be good enough tomorrow, and that is fine. Change does not require self-punishment. You can adjust without disowning what came before. Learning to accept good enough is often less about lowering standards and more about redefining them, shifting from ideal outcomes to functional ones. This shift reduces friction. It allows you to move through life with less tension, less delay, less self-criticism. You still care. You still try. You simply stop demanding that every effort prove your worth. Good enough is not giving up. It is letting go of unnecessary strain. It is recognizing that value does not always increase with effort. That sometimes stopping is the most sensible choice. In a world that encourages constant optimization, good enough is quietly radical. It is also, most of the time, exactly what is needed, and that makes it very good indeed. Attention is a flashlight. Attention works like a flashlight. Wherever you point it, things become brighter, sharper, more detailed. Shapes emerge, textures appear. What was once background becomes foreground. What the flashlight illuminates starts to feel important. This happens whether or not the thing itself has changed. The object stays the same, only the light moves. The mind often forgets this distinction. When attention rests on a problem, the problem grows. Not necessarily in reality, but in experience. It gains edges, it develops layers, it feels heavier, more complex, more urgent. The flashlight stays on it and the rest of the room fades. This can create the illusion that the problem is all there is. Attention does not just observe, it shapes perception. It decides what stands out and what recedes. It determines the emotional weight of a moment. This happens quietly, automatically, without conscious choice most of the time. You may notice this when your mood shifts after focusing on something for a while. A small irritation becomes overwhelming. A minor worry turns into a looming concern. Nothing external changed. The light just stayed there too long. The mind is very good at holding the flashlight steady. It locks on, it investigates, it scans every angle. This feels like engagement, like responsibility. But attention does not always need to be fixed. It can move. The flashlight is portable. This seems obvious, but it is easy to forget. especially when something captures attention forcefully. Fear does this, anxiety, curiosity, even excitement. These emotions grip the flashlight and refuse to let go. They convince you that whatever they are illuminating deserves exclusive focus, that looking away would be careless, so you stay. Over time, this creates fatigue, not because the situation is unmanageable, but because the light never turns off. The nervous system was not designed for constant illumination. It needs dimness, it needs shadow, it needs moments where nothing is being examined. When attention is always on, everything feels intense. There is also a tendency to confuse attention with control. If you keep watching something, you believe you are managing it, monitoring it, preventing it from getting worse. This is sometimes true. Often it is not. Attention can amplify without improving. It can exhaust without resolving. You might notice this with thoughts. The more you focus on a particular worry, the more elaborate it becomes. It generates scenarios, arguments, outcomes. The flashlight reveals details that would otherwise remain unseen, but these details are not always helpful. They can be speculative, hypothetical, unnecessary. Yet once illuminated, they feel real. The same applies to positives. When attention rests on something pleasant, it expands. A small moment of contentment deepens. A sense of appreciation grows. The experience becomes richer. Attention works both ways. This is where choice becomes relevant. Not the forced kind. Not the kind that demands constant redirection. Just a quiet awareness that you are holding the flashlight, even when it feels like you are not. You may not be able to control what initially captures attention, but you can often decide how long it stays there. This decision does not have to be dramatic. It can be as simple as noticing that the beam has been fixed in one place for a while. You do not need to yank it away. You can just let it drift. Attention responds well to gentleness. It resists force. When you try to drag it elsewhere, it tightens. When you allow it to wander, it often does. There is also a difference between awareness and fixation. Awareness is broad. It includes context. Fixation narrows. It excludes everything else. The flashlight analogy helps clarify this. You can light up an entire room softly, or you can focus a sharp beam on a single object. Both are forms of seeing. Fixation uses the narrow beam. Living exclusively in that mode makes the world feel harsh, contrasty, unforgiving. Widening the beam changes the experience. The problem does not disappear, but it becomes part of a larger picture. You see walls, space, other objects. You realize the problem is not the whole room. This shift often brings relief, even when nothing has been solved. The mind does not always want this. It prefers certainty. Narrow focus provides that. It gives the illusion of control. Broad attention feels less secure, less defined, but it is often more accurate. You might notice how easily attention is hijacked. Notifications, news, other people's emotions, your own internal commentary. Everything competes for the beam. Once captured, attention tends to linger. This is not a personal failing. Attention evolved to respond to novelty and threat. It moves toward what feels important, not what is balanced. Understanding this helps reduce self-blame. You are not weak for getting stuck. You are human. The question then becomes, where is the flashlight now? Not where should it be, just where it is. This noticing is powerful. It creates a small pause, a moment of distance between you and the focus. In that pause, you have options. You can keep the light where it is. Sometimes that is necessary. Sometimes something truly requires focus. Or you can shift it slightly to something neutral, something stable, something present. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means not illuminating them continuously. Problems do not need constant light to exist. They will still be there when you look back. Meanwhile, other aspects of life deserve illumination too. The chair you are sitting on, the sound in the room, the fact that you are breathing without effort. These things are usually in the dark. They become visible only when you point the light at them. When you do, they offer a different experience, less intense, more grounding. This is not about distraction. It is about balance. A flashlight used exclusively on one object will eventually drain its battery. The same happens with attention. Spreading the light conserves energy. It also changes your relationship with thought. You stop assuming that whatever has your attention must be the most important thing in your life. Sometimes it is just the loudest. Attention follows habit as much as relevance. It goes where it has gone before. Changing that pattern does not require effort so much as curiosity. What else is here? This question widens the beam. It invites context, perspective, breath. Over time, you may notice that some things lose their grip when they are not constantly illuminated. They shrink, they soften, they take up less space, not because they were defeated, but because they were no longer fed. Attention is a resource, finite, valuable. Where you place it shapes your experience more than most external circumstances. Remembering that you are holding the flashlight does not mean you control everything you see. It simply means you are not powerless. You can let the light rest somewhere else for a while, even briefly, even imperfectly. Sometimes that small shift is enough to change how the room feels, not by altering what is in it, but by changing what you choose to see. Waiting for things to be perfect is exhausting. Waiting for perfection has a particular kind of tiredness to it. Not the kind that comes from effort, but the kind that comes from holding still for too long. You are not moving forward, but you are not resting either. You are paused, alert, watching the horizon for a sign that conditions have finally improved. They rarely do. Perfection is always just ahead, just after one more adjustment, one more improvement, one more piece of information. It stays slightly out of reach, convincing you that waiting is reasonable. This waiting feels responsible, sensible, mature. You tell yourself you are being careful, thoughtful, strategic. You are not rushing, you are preparing. But preparation without movement slowly drains energy. You may notice how many things are postponed because they are not quite ready. Conversations, projects, decisions, even enjoyment. You wait until you feel more confident, more certain, more aligned. The trouble is that certainty is not something that arrives on its own. It is often created through action, not before it, so the waiting continues. Perfection creates a narrow window for participation. Conditions must be right. Timing must align. You must feel ready in a very specific way. Most days do not meet these criteria. Life, meanwhile, keeps happening. Time passes. Opportunities shift. What once felt urgent becomes irrelevant. The cost of waiting quietly accumulates. This cost is subtle. It shows up as low-level fatigue, as a sense of being behind without knowing exactly why, as frustration directed inward. You may feel like you are always about to begin. The mind likes the idea of perfect conditions because it removes risk. If everything is ideal, failure becomes less likely. Criticism loses its power. Regret is minimized. At least in theory. In practice, perfect conditions rarely exist. They are imagined states, assembled from hopes and fears. They live in the future, where they cannot be tested. So you wait. Waiting also offers protection. As long as you have not acted, nothing can go wrong. Nothing can be judged. Nothing can be proven insufficient. This safety is appealing, but it is also restrictive. Perfection demands a lot. It asks for full alignment before allowing movement. Mood, energy, timing, confidence, clarity all need to cooperate. When they do not, you interpret that as a sign to pause. This makes sense on paper. In real life, it leads to inertia. You may notice how perfection disguises itself as patience. It borrows the language of wisdom. It tells you that rushing is dangerous, that timing matters, that waiting shows restraint. Sometimes this is true. Often, it is fear speaking politely. Fear does not always shout. Sometimes it suggests caution. It frames itself as discernment. It sounds reasonable. The result is the same. Nothing happens. The exhaustion comes from holding potential without release, from carrying ideas that are never expressed, from rehearsing actions that are never taken. This is not a dramatic exhaustion. It is quiet, persistent. It sits in the background and dulls motivation. You may find yourself tired without having done much. That tiredness is not laziness. It is tension without movement. The body is built for cycles. Effort followed by rest. Action followed by recovery. Waiting for perfection interrupts this rhythm. You are always in preparation mode, always gathering, always adjusting, never finishing. Finishing is what allows rest. Perfection resists finishing. There is always one more thing to refine, one more scenario to consider, one more improvement that could make the outcome safer. This creates a strange loop. You are exhausted, but you cannot stop because you have not begun. You have not begun because you are waiting for the exhaustion to lift. It does not. There is also an emotional cost. Waiting for perfect conditions sends a subtle message to yourself that where you are now is not sufficient. that you are not quite ready, not quite capable. Over time, this erodes confidence. You begin to trust hypothetical future versions of yourself more than the current one. The one who will feel ready, the one who will know more, the one who will be calmer, braver, clearer. That version keeps getting postponed. Meanwhile, the present self waits. This waiting can feel like self-respect, but it often becomes self-doubt in disguise. You may also notice resentment toward circumstances, toward other people who seem to act without hesitation, toward yourself for not moving. This resentment adds to the exhaustion. Perfection also creates an all or nothing dynamic. If conditions are not ideal, the action feels pointless. Why start if it cannot be done properly? This logic is persuasive. It also ensures stagnation. Most meaningful things in life begin imperfectly. Conversations are awkward. Projects are rough. Decisions are made with incomplete information. Waiting until all uncertainty disappears means waiting forever. The mind often overestimates how much preparation is required. It imagines that clarity must come first, followed by action. In reality, clarity often follows action. You understand something better after you engage with it, not before. Perfection delays this understanding. There is a particular fatigue that comes from imagining how things could be without ever finding out how they are. Possibility remains abstract, untested, heavy. Action, even imperfect action, lightens this load. It replaces speculation with experience. Waiting also narrows the field of attention. You become focused on readiness rather than reality, on internal states rather than external movement. This can make life feel small. Everything becomes about you and your preparedness, your feelings, your certainty, your alignment. The world waits politely, but it does not stop. Perfection makes life feel conditional. Enjoyment after achievement, rest after completion, permission after approval. These conditions multiply. You find yourself postponing simple things: celebration, relaxation, satisfaction, all waiting for some future moment when everything finally lines up. That moment rarely arrives. There is relief in accepting that readiness is not a prerequisite, that you can move while unsure, that you can begin without confidence, that things can be messy and still meaningful. This relief is not dramatic. It feels like exhaling. You stop holding yourself in suspension. Waiting for perfection is exhausting because it asks you to be constantly vigilant, always assessing, always measuring, always comparing the present to an ideal that does not exist. Letting go of that weight frees energy, not because life becomes easier, but because you stop resisting its actual conditions. You work with what is available rather than demanding what is ideal. This shift does not require courage in the heroic sense. It requires tolerance. Tolerance for discomfort, for imperfection, for outcomes that are merely adequate. This tolerance grows with use. Each time you act without perfect conditions, you prove something quietly important: that you can handle what happens next, that you do not need guarantees to move forward. This proof builds trust, not in outcomes, but in yourself. Waiting for things to be perfect keeps that trust theoretical. Acting, even imperfectly, makes it real. The exhaustion lifts, not because everything is resolved, but because energy is no longer trapped in waiting. It starts flowing again. And flow, even when it is slow or uneven, is less tiring than standing still forever, watching for a perfection that was never meant to arrive. The quiet satisfaction nobody posts about. There is a kind of satisfaction that rarely makes it into conversation. It does not photograph well. It does not come with a before and after. It does not sound impressive when described out loud. It is the satisfaction of things simply working, a day that unfolds without friction, a routine that holds, a system that does not demand attention. These experiences are deeply stabilizing, yet they pass almost unnoticed. Nobody posts about a normal evening that felt fine. This kind of satisfaction lacks drama. It does not involve triumph or transformation. There is no arc, no struggle overcome, just a sense that life is moving at a manageable pace. Because it is ordinary, it is easy to dismiss. We are taught implicitly that satisfaction should be visible, that it should look like happiness, or achievement, or relief after difficulty. If it does not meet these criteria, it feels unworthy of mention. So we overlook it. The quiet satisfaction shows up in small confirmations: the bill that gets paid without stress, the meal that tastes decent, the body that feels stable, the conversation that ends calmly. None of these stand out on their own. Together, they create a life that feels livable. This kind of satisfaction is not exciting. It does not elevate mood dramatically. It does not inspire declarations. It just settles in and stays for a while. And because it stays, it becomes invisible. We tend to notice satisfaction when it contrasts with pain, relief after hardship, calm after chaos. When things improve sharply, the improvement is felt. But when satisfaction is consistent, it fades into the background. This is not a failure of appreciation. It is a function of attention. The mind tracks change more easily than stability. Stability is assumed until it is gone. This creates a strange imbalance in memory. You remember the hard days clearly, the stressful periods, the moments of disruption, the quiet stretches in between blur together. Later, when you look back, life seems more difficult than it actually was. Not because it was, but because the peaceful parts left fewer markers. The quiet satisfaction also resists storytelling. There is no clear narrative, nothing to frame. You cannot easily say why it felt good. It just did. This makes it hard to share. And if it cannot be shared, it feels less real. In a world oriented around sharing, this kind of experience is easily overshadowed. Social comparison plays a role here. You see highlights, milestones, peaks. You rarely see the maintenance, the continuity, the quiet competence that keeps things running. So your own steady life can feel inadequate by comparison. You assume you're missing something, but what you are missing is the absence of crisis. That absence does not register as success. It feels like nothing happened, yet nothing happening is often a sign that many things went right. The quiet satisfaction is also closely tied to sufficiency. Enough sleep, enough food, enough money to cover needs, enough emotional support, enough rarely excites. We are conditioned to want more growth, more progress, more intensity. Enough feels like a plateau, but plateaus are not stagnation. They are resting places. They allow systems to recover, patterns to stabilize, energy to redistribute. Constant peaks are unsustainable. The body knows this. The nervous system knows this. The mind often forgets. So it dismisses quiet satisfaction as unremarkable. It looks for the next high, the next goal, the next thing that will finally make life feel complete. In doing so, it overlooks what is already supporting it. There is also a humility in quiet satisfaction. It does not inflate the ego. It does not confirm a narrative of exceptionalism. It simply affirms that life is functioning. This humility can feel unsatisfying to the part of the mind that wants recognition, but it is deeply grounding. The quiet satisfaction is the feeling of being held by routines, of knowing what comes next, of not having to reinvent yourself every day. It is the comfort of familiarity without boredom. This satisfaction often shows up at the end of the day, when nothing spectacular happened, but you feel okay. Not elated, not drained, just okay. This okayness is easily overlooked. You may even question it. Is this all? Should I feel more? Should I want more? These questions are not signs of ingratitude. They are signs of a culture that undervalues steadiness. The quiet satisfaction does not promise transformation. It promises continuity, and continuity is what allows life to deepen. Without it, everything becomes a sprint, a chase, a series of recoveries from exhaustion. Quiet satisfaction supports longevity. It also supports perspective. When you are not constantly reacting, you can observe, reflect, notice subtle shifts. This kind of awareness is difficult when life is loud, so the quiet satisfaction works in the background, making reflection possible without demanding attention. It does not need applause. In fact, drawing attention to it can make it disappear. It thrives on being left alone. This is why it rarely gets posted. The act of posting would turn it into something else, a performance, a statement, a comparison. Quiet satisfaction is not interested in that. It is private, personal, unshared. You may only notice it in its absence. When routines break, when systems fail, when small disruptions accumulate, then you realize what was holding everything together. Not happiness, not success, just enough. There is a subtle relief in recognizing this, in allowing yourself to value the uneventful, to appreciate the days that pass without requiring resilience. These days are not wasted. They are the foundation. They are what make the hard days survivable and the good days possible. The quiet satisfaction does not promise fulfillment in the dramatic sense. It offers something more durable, a sense that life is not constantly asking something from you, that you are allowed to exist without performing. This satisfaction may never announce itself. It may never be celebrated. It may never be shared. But it is there, in the ordinary, in the routines, in the spaces where nothing needs to be fixed. Learning to notice it does not require effort. It requires permission. Permission to accept that a life does not need to be remarkable to be meaningful, that satisfaction does not need to be loud to be real, that sometimes the most honest measure of a good day is that you did not feel the need to tell anyone about it, and you slept just fine anyway. Nothing changed, yet everything feels lighter. Sometimes nothing changes, not externally, not in any measurable way. The same routines remain, the same responsibilities wait, the same world continues at the same pace, and yet something feels lighter. This is difficult to explain, even to yourself. There was no breakthrough, no decision, no dramatic shift. You did not fix anything. You did not solve a long-standing problem. You did not reinvent your life. You just feel less weighed down by it. This lightness can be confusing. The mind looks for reasons. It wants a cause it can point to, a moment it can label. Without one, the feeling seems unreliable. Temporary, possibly imaginary, but it is real. It often arrives quietly, without permission. You notice it in small ways, a thought that passes without sticking, a situation that would normally irritate you but does not, a sense of space where tension used to live. Nothing changed. But your relationship to what is happening did. This kind of shift does not announce itself because it is not an event. It is an adjustment, a subtle rebalancing of attention, expectation, and resistance. It happens slowly, then all at once. The mind tends to look for improvement in outcomes, better circumstances, fewer problems, clear wins. When those things do not appear, it assumes nothing has progressed. But progress does not always show up as change. Sometimes it shows up as less friction. You are still doing the same things. You are just not carrying them as heavily. This is easy to miss because it lacks drama. There is no obvious marker, no moment where you can say, this is when it happened. It simply becomes noticeable one day when you realize that something that used to drain you now feels manageable, or neutral, or unremarkable. The absence of strain is not something we are taught to recognize as improvement. We are taught to look for addition, for achievement, for expansion. But subtraction matters too. Less rumination, less urgency, less self-criticism, less emotional enrollment in every thought. These changes do not alter your schedule. They alter your experience of it. The mind struggles with this because it wants evidence. It wants proof that something meaningful occurred. Without visible change, it worries that the lightness is fragile. It waits for the other shoe to drop. But this lightness is not luck. It is not a mood. It is the result of accumulated noticing, of small shifts repeated quietly, of habits of attention gradually loosening their grip. Nothing changed suddenly because it did not need to. The weight was not coming from the circumstances themselves. It was coming from how tightly they were held. When that grip relaxes, even slightly, the load feels different. You may notice that problems still exist. Responsibilities still demand effort. Uncertainty still appears, but they no longer feel like personal failures. They feel like parts of life. This distinction is important. When everything feels personal, it is exhausting. Every obstacle feels like a reflection of who you are. Every delay feels like a verdict. Every mistake feels defining. When that personalization eases, the same events feel lighter. Not because they are smaller, but because they are no longer attached to identity. You are not the problem. You are the one experiencing it. This shift happens quietly, often without conscious intent. You do not wake up deciding to care less. You simply stop overinvesting. The mind still produces commentary, still offers worries, still points out flaws, but those thoughts no longer land as heavily. They pass through. This is not indifference. It is perspective. Perspective does not remove difficulty. It reduces entanglement. You still care. You just do not fuse. This lightness can feel unsettling at first. If you are used to tension, its absence feels unfamiliar. You may even mistrust it, as if something important has been dropped. What if I become careless? What if I lose motivation? What if this means I am giving up? These questions arise because tension is often mistaken for engagement. But engagement does not require strain. You can be involved without being burdened. You can show up without carrying everything internally. This realization often comes later, when you look back and notice that you have been functioning differently for a while. You handled something calmly that would have rattled you before. You let a thought go without chasing it. You rested without feeling guilty. Nothing changed externally. But internally, the system learned something. It learned that not every signal requires response, that not every thought deserves attention, that not every discomfort needs to be fixed immediately. This learning is embodied. It is not a belief you adopt. It is a pattern that shifts through experience. That is why it feels unremarkable. You do not feel proud. You do not feel accomplished. You just feel less tense. And that is enough. This lightness is not permanent. It does not lock in. Some days it fades. Some days old patterns return. This does not mean the change was imaginary. It means the system is flexible. You are not arriving at a final state. You are learning how to move in and out of states with less resistance. Nothing changed because life does not stop presenting challenges. Everything feels lighter because you no longer meet each challenge with the same internal posture. This posture matters more than any single circumstance. It determines how much energy is spent, how much recovery is needed, how much life feels like effort. When posture softens, life feels more spacious. You may still want things. You may still work toward goals. You may still feel frustration, but there is less urgency around it, less pressure to resolve everything immediately, less belief that happiness is just one fix away. This removes a lot of weight. The mind may still look for explanations. It may still try to pin the lightness to a reason. That is fine. It does not need one. Some shifts are the result of accumulation, of many small realizations layered over time, none of them dramatic on their own. Together, they change how the system responds. Nothing changed overnight because it did not happen overnight. Everything feels lighter because you are no longer carrying what was never yours to hold. This does not make life perfect. It makes it workable. You still move through the same world, but you do so with less internal commentary, less resistance, less need to control. This creates room for rest, room for noticing, room for simply being where you are without needing to improve it immediately. That room is the lightness. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It does not ask you to protect it. It exists quietly as long as you allow it. Nothing changed. And somehow, that was exactly what needed to happen.